Hello everyone, I hope you are doing well, and also I hope you will like this video and subscribe to my channel if you like it. Let's get to the story. The letter felt heavier than it should have, as if it were carrying something far more ominous than a simple notice. I unfolded it, and there, staring back at me, were words that almost blurred as I tried to process them. Congratulations on your recent sale. A stranger named Cole had apparently bought my land. My land. The land I'd toiled over, saved for, and finally acquired a decade ago. And I hadn't sold a single inch of it. The name Cole was unfamiliar, but the sale paperwork referenced someone I knew all too well. My neighbor, Ben. Ben, who always had a way of digging a little too much into others' affairs. Recently, he'd brought up my land more than once, jokingly asking if I'd ever thought of selling. At the time, it didn't raise any alarms. Ben was known for his odd sense of humor, but now, with this letter in hand, his jokes didn't feel so innocent anymore. The realization set in with a strange, buzzing anger that made the room feel smaller. Ben wasn't just a nosy neighbor. He was attempting to pull the rug out from under me in the most shameless way imaginable. If he thought he'd get away with this, he was sorely mistaken. I had worked far too hard to let anyone, especially someone I trusted, take what was mine. My pulse quickened as I paced the room. This wasn't going to end with some polite confrontation or quiet acquiescence. I took a deep breath, my fists clenched as I marched over to Ben's house. I wasn't sure what I'd say, but I knew I'd keep my composure. At least at first. When he opened the door, his eyes flickered with surprise, as if he hadn't expected me to show up unannounced. He gave me his usual toothy grin, but today, it felt smug. Almost mocking. "Grant, to what do I owe the pleasure?" he asked, his tone light but his gaze shifting ever so slightly. I held up the letter, not bothering with small talk. "Care to explain this, Ben?" He squinted, pretending to read over the words, and then let out a short laugh. "What's that? Some sort of junk mail? It's a letter saying my land's been sold. And guess who's mentioned here as my representative? You, Ben." His face remained calm, but I noticed a twitch in his jaw. "Grant, you sure you're not mistaken? People get these scams all the time. Phony letters trying to spook you. Best to ignore it. Don't patronize me. I've checked. This isn't a scam. Someone signed a document with my name on it, and that someone had no right to do it." My voice was sharper than I intended, but the idea that he could lie so brazenly made my blood boil. Ben just shrugged, as if my anger meant nothing. "Look, I'm not sure what you're accusing me of, but I'd suggest you calm down. You're probably just misremembering something. Maybe you did sign something. Sometimes things slip through the cracks." I couldn't believe the nerve of this guy. Misremember? My property? No. He knew exactly what he was doing. And if he thought he'd talk his way out of this, he was mistaken. I turned and walked away without another word, seething. Ben's dismissive attitude only cemented my suspicions. This wasn't some simple mistake or misunderstanding. He had gone out of his way to make this happen, and I wasn't about to let it slide. I needed to figure out who Cole was and how he fit into this twisted scheme. My next stop was to track down this so-called buyer and see what he had to say about his supposed purchase. Finding Cole was easier than I thought. He was listed in the phone book, and when I called, he answered with an overly friendly tone that sounded entirely too rehearsed. We arranged to meet at a coffee shop that afternoon, and as I walked in, he waved me over with a broad, almost too friendly smile. He was a man in his 50s, with a look that screamed smooth talker from the way his hair was slicked back to the polished shoes that reflected the dim cafe lights. "Grant, so nice to meet you," he greeted, reaching out to shake my hand like we were old friends. I sat down without reciprocating his smile, pulling out the letter and setting it on the table between us. "Nice to meet you too, Cole, but I think we need to clear a few things up." I kept my voice level, though inside, every instinct was telling me this man was trouble. "I understand you believe you bought my land." He leaned back, nodding slowly, as if I'd just confirmed the greatest news he'd heard all year. "That's right. Got all the paperwork here, actually," he said, patting a leather folder he'd brought with him. "Ben told me you were looking to sell, and I have to say, I jumped at the chance. Land like that doesn't go on the market too often, you know." "Funny," I replied, my voice laced with irritation. I wasn't looking to sell at all. A look of feigned confusion crossed his face, but I could see the flicker of something else. Was it nerves? Surprise? He recovered quickly, adjusting his collar and letting out a laugh. "Oh, come on. I'm sure you agreed to it. Even if you don't remember, Ben mentioned you were looking to liquidate some assets. No, I think I'd remember selling my own land. I leaned forward, locking eyes with him, and I certainly didn't appoint Ben as my representative for any sale. So why don't you explain to me how you ended up with documents claiming otherwise? Cole's friendly facade started to crack. He cleared his throat, flipping open the leather folder to pull out a stack of papers. Well, everything's in order here. Ben handled the signing process. He assured me you'd approved it all. As far as I knew, he was acting on your behalf. I glanced over the paperwork he laid out. My name was there, in ink, but the signature? It was a sloppy forgery at best, and the notary stamp was just off enough to scream fake to anyone looking closely. Anger simmered just beneath the surface, but I kept my cool. Do you have any proof that I actually authorized Ben to sell this land? I asked, my tone sharp. Well, Cole hesitated, looking less sure of himself. Ben showed me some emails you supposedly sent, but I don't have them with me. Convenient, I muttered. Let me make something clear, Cole. I didn't authorize this sale. I didn't authorize Ben, and this is my land. You're in possession of fraudulent documents, and if you proceed with this, you'll be facing more than just a polite conversation. Cole fumbled for words, his confidence visibly crumbling. Look, maybe there's been a misunderstanding here. Ben assured me. I cut him off. There's no misunderstanding. I know exactly what's going on, and if Ben's assured you of anything, it's that he's willing to lie through his teeth to make a quick buck. I left the cafe, feeling a dark satisfaction at the sight of Cole's stunned expression. As much as I'd hoped that he was somehow oblivious, it was clear to me now. Both he and Ben were in on this scheme. But they'd underestimated me if they thought I'd just roll over and let them get away with it. With each step back to my car, I felt my resolve harden. If they wanted to play dirty, I'd show them just how determined I could be. I knew that to fight this battle, I'd need someone with legal knowledge on my side. That's where Jordan came in. Jordan was a friend from college, a sharp-witted, tenacious attorney in his early 30s who'd made a name for himself taking on shady characters who thought they could bend the law to their advantage. When I explained the situation, he leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing in a way that told me he was already piecing together a plan. Forgery and unauthorized sale of property, huh? Jordan said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. Classic con. They probably thought you'd be too intimidated or out of your depth to challenge it. Not a chance, I replied firmly. I want to go after them and prove that they forged everything. Jordan nodded, pulling out a notepad and jotting down a few notes. All right, first things first, we need solid proof. If they forged your signature, there's bound to be evidence in the paperwork. Plus, any transaction like this has to be filed with the county clerk. So let's start by examining the sale records. The next day, I followed Jordan's advice and headed to the county clerk's office. Behind the desk sat Lisa, a meticulous woman in her mid-50s who had a reputation for knowing every detail of her records. I explained my situation to her, showing her the questionable documents that Cole had provided. Lisa adjusted her glasses and examined the documents closely. After a few minutes, she let out a small, her eyebrows knitting together as she flipped through the pages. These are odd, she said, her voice filled with a mixture of skepticism and intrigue. The notary stamp here doesn't match any that we use in this county, and the way these forms are filed, they don't follow the usual process for property transfers. I felt a surge of hope. So you're saying this might be a fake? Lisa nodded, tapping her fingers thoughtfully against the document. More than likely. I've worked here long enough to know a shortcut when I see one, and this reeks of it. Whoever did this either didn't know the right process or didn't care enough to cover their tracks properly. With Lisa's help, we gathered every piece of documentation available on my property. She provided us with a certified copy of the original deed showing my sole ownership and pointed out key inconsistencies in the sale documents that Cole had brought. Jordan was thrilled when I showed him what we'd found. With these records, we could prove that the entire transaction was riddled with red flags. Over the next few days, Jordan and I worked late into the night, analyzing every forged signature, every misfiled form. He even managed to track down the notary whose stamp had been faked on the paperwork. When we contacted him, he confirmed he'd never notarized anything related to my property and was willing to testify to that fact. Piece by piece, we built our case. And with every new discovery, my anger shifted from simmering rage to a focused determination. Ben and Cole had treated me like a pawn, expecting me to stay quiet while they pulled the strings. But they were about to learn that I wasn't someone they could easily manipulate. Finally, when we had everything we needed, Jordan prepared the lawsuit. We'd be suing both Ben and Cole for fraud, forgery, and damages. The courthouse felt colder than usual on the day of the hearing, a silent reminder of what was at stake. Ben and Cole sat at the defendant's table, looking uncomfortable as they whispered to each other, probably concocting some last-minute defense. Jordan was by my side, his calm confidence giving me a sense of reassurance that this was going to end in my favor. As the judge called the case to order, Jordan stood up to present our side. He began by laying out a detailed account of my ownership of the property and explained how Ben had fraudulently represented himself as my agent, working with Cole to concoct a fake sale. He introduced the original deed, my actual signature, and highlighted the significant differences between that and the forged one. Each time Jordan pointed out another piece of evidence, I could see Ben shifting in his seat, his face growing redder. Then Jordan called Lisa, the county clerk, to the stand. She testified about the irregularities she'd found in the documents, her tone as clear and precise as if she were reading from a manual. She pointed to the notary stamp that didn't match, explaining that the official process had been bypassed. Every word she spoke was a nail in the coffin for Ben and Cole's scheme. Next, the notary himself took the stand, visibly annoyed at the misuse of his credentials. He confirmed he had never stamped anything related to my land, nor had he ever worked with Ben or Cole. His testimony was damning, underlining the fraudulent steps they'd taken. Ben's lawyer tried to counter, claiming that I had originally agreed to a sale and was now having seller's remorse. But Jordan was prepared. With a calm, cutting precision, he pointed out how all communication in the supposed sale was conducted by Ben, with no direct involvement from me, no authorization, and no proof beyond Ben's word that I'd wanted to sell. Jordan also presented my phone records and emails as evidence that Ben's story was fabricated from start to finish. Then, in a final twist, Jordan brought out the recorded conversation I'd had with Cole at the cafe. As the audio played, the courtroom filled with the unmistakable nervousness in Cole's voice as he struggled to explain the shady deal. The recording was like the final puzzle piece clicking into place, revealing the full picture of Ben and Cole's scheme. When it was Ben's turn to testify, he fumbled through his statements, contradicting himself with every answer. His lawyer looked frustrated, sensing the case slipping through their fingers. Finally, the judge addressed the courtroom, her gaze moving between Ben and Cole with thinly veiled disappointment. It is evident from the evidence presented that Mr. Grant's ownership rights were blatantly disregarded, and fraudulent actions were taken to bypass lawful procedures. In a clear, steady voice, the judge ruled in my favor, ordering Ben and Cole to return the property to me, pay substantial damages, and cover all legal fees. The gavel struck, and just like that, the weight I'd been carrying for weeks lifted. As I walked out of the courthouse with Jordan, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief and justice. But I wasn't done with them yet. Ben and Cole would learn that messing with me had far-reaching consequences. The legal victory was sweet, but I wanted to make sure Ben and Cole understood that their actions had consequences beyond the courtroom. They thought they could trick me, profit off my hard work, and walk away unscathed. But now, it was time for them to face the fallout in their own lives. News of the trial spread quickly through the community. I didn't even have to lift a finger to get the word out. People had a knack for picking up on juicy stories like this, and soon everyone knew what Ben and Cole had done. Their reputations tanked almost overnight. Ben had always presented himself as an upstanding citizen, a pillar of the community. But now, parents stopped letting their kids play near his yard, and neighbors avoided him like the plague. He'd become the very definition of a pariah. Cole didn't fare much better. His real estate business had thrived on trust and connections, but word of his involvement in a fraudulent land deal spread fast, and clients pulled out of agreements left and right. His name became synonymous with dishonesty, and every deal he tried to make from then on was met with suspicion. The business he'd built up over decades unraveled, and it wasn't long before his office space had a for lease sign hanging in the window. I also made sure that both of them felt the financial hit. Between the damages awarded by the courts and the legal fees they now owed, they'd be in debt for a long time. Ben had to sell his car, and Cole's once lavish lifestyle suddenly looked a lot more modest. Justice, I'd learned, was a powerful thing when applied decisively. As for me, life returned to normal. My land was safe, my hard work preserved, and I could walk through my neighborhood with a sense of pride. I didn't need to look over my shoulder or worry that someone was plotting to take what was mine. And whenever I saw Ben or Cole around town, I didn't have to say a word. The looks on their faces told me everything. They knew they'd tried to cross the wrong person, and they'd paid the price. After the court battle, I thought I could finally move on. My land was mine, and Ben and Cole were defeated. But life has a way of stirring the pot just when you think everything's settled. About a month after the ruling, I received a letter in the mail. No sender's name, just a plain white envelope with my address neatly printed on the front. Inside, I found a single page. It read, "What you see isn't always what you get. Watch your back." No signature, no clue who it was from. I felt a cold unease crawl up my spine, wondering if Ben or Cole had decided to retaliate, but I shook it off. They were already down and out. Neither had the means or reputation left to challenge me. I tried to dismiss the note as a tasteless prank. Then, a few days later, I noticed something strange. As I walked along the edge of my property, I spotted fresh tire tracks leading up to the side of my land where the fence bordered Ben's yard. The ground was disturbed as if something or someone had been digging there recently. At first, I wondered if Ben was trying to damage the fence out of spite. But when I looked closer, I saw small stakes hammered into the ground in a line stretching across my land. I called Jordan, who immediately recognized what was happening. "They're trying to challenge the property boundary," he explained. "If Ben can claim there's been a mistake with the property lines, he could attempt to reclaim part of the land or stall the court's decision." With Jordan's help, I hired a surveyor to confirm the boundaries. After hours of measurements, the surveyor confirmed what I already knew. My land was exactly as recorded. But as the surveyor packed up, he mentioned something strange. "This isn't the first time someone's tried to challenge property boundaries in this area. You might want to look up old land records." Intrigued, I spent the next few days digging into county records, tracing back the history of my property. What I found stunned me. Nearly 40 years ago, the land had belonged to a man named Richard, who had sold part of it under suspicious terms to Ben's family. The record showed an abrupt transfer of ownership, with similar forged documents. It was as if history was repeating itself. The more I looked, the more I uncovered evidence of a scheme going back decades. Fraudulent sales, neighbors muscled out, quiet buyouts, and right in the middle of it all was Ben's father, who'd pulled the same stunts that Ben was trying to use on me. I realized then that this wasn't just a one-time betrayal. For Ben, this was a twisted family tradition, a way of acquiring land through manipulation and intimidation. I was merely the latest in a line of targets, but I was the first who had managed to fight back. Armed with this new knowledge, I decided it was time to put an end to the cycle for good. Through Jordan, I submitted a formal complaint to the county, exposing the fraudulent history and documenting how Ben had tried to falsify property lines. The county launched an investigation, not only into Ben's actions, but into the entire history of land acquisitions connected to his family. For the first time, the full extent of the shady dealings was brought to light. The investigation unearthed enough evidence that Ben and his family faced multiple lawsuits from previous owners, each seeking reparations for land they'd been bullied or tricked into losing. The financial strain was overwhelming. Ben's family assets, already battered by his and Cole's debts, crumbled under the weight of restitution payments. What they had once proudly claimed as family legacy was dismantled in court, piece by piece. Meanwhile, Cole wasn't off the hook either. As it turned out, he had collaborated with Ben's father in past schemes, and the new revelations implicated him as a repeat offender in property fraud. The authorities launched a full investigation, and Cole faced criminal charges that could lead to prison time. In a final twist, the land records were updated to reflect all the rightful owners from over the years, restoring what had been wrongfully taken. For some, it was too late. They had moved on, their dreams for that land lost to time. But others returned, reclaiming their pieces of land and rebuilding what had been lost. For them, and for me, it was a moment of closure and justice. With the dust settling, I took a walk around my land one quiet evening, feeling the crisp air and knowing it was finally, truly mine. Without threat, without fear, I glanced at the old boundary markers, some barely visible after years of being ignored, and thought of those who had fought similar battles. It was over. Ben's legacy of deceit had been exposed, his family's name forever tarnished, and his tactics rendered useless. My land was secure, but more than that, the entire neighborhood had been freed from the shadow of Ben's manipulation. The strangest part, though, was that I found peace not in revenge, but in knowing that justice had taken a bigger course than I ever could have planned. For the first time, I didn't feel the weight of betrayal or the need to look over my shoulder. As I walked back to my house, I passed by the spot where I'd found that cryptic note warning me to watch my back. I paused for a moment, half expecting another twist, but the land was silent, calm. I realized that whoever sent that note had probably intended to intimidate me, to make me doubt my ability to protect what was mine. But all it had done was make me stronger, sharper, and more resilient. And with Ben and Cole out of the picture, I was finally free to enjoy my land, knowing that the threats were gone for good. In the end, I didn't need revenge. I'd built something more enduring than Ben's schemes could ever be, a place that was genuinely mine, protected not by fear or manipulation, but by truth and resilience. And that was a legacy worth keeping. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If so, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. See you soon.